Good afternoon, everybody. The International Parking and Mobility Institute is pleased to present today's Shop Talk, the University Environment, Planning for Spring and What's Changed. My name is Justin Grunert, and I'll be assisting Brett Wood, CAPP, in moderating today's Shop Talk. As a reminder, today's Shop Talk is being recorded. We will make the recording available online and post it to IPMI's YouTube channel within a few days. Before we start, I want to say a few quick housekeeping rules. If you have a webcam and are comfortable doing so, please turn your camera on. IPMI wants everyone to feel engaged and participate, and we want to see your smiling faces. We want to make this virtual Shop Talk just like a regular Shop Talk, face-to-face and sharing our ideas. As a reminder, all participants' lines are muted. We invite participants to do so, to use the raise your hand feature to participate. For online participants, please click on the participants icon in the Zoom control menu. A separate window will pop up. The raise your hand option will appear at the bottom of the participants menu. Click on the raise your hand and we will recognize you and unmute your line. Phone participants can press *9 to raise their hand and *6 to unmute their lines. Once recognized, your microphone will be unmuted and allowed to join the conversation. We ask that everyone please say their name and the organization that they work for, so that way everyone knows who you are. You may also type your questions into the chat. Click the chat icon and type your question or comment and click send. We will read them to the group as they come in. And now it's my pleasure to turn our audience over to Brett Wood, our moderator. Brett, the audience is yours.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate that, and appreciate you all showing up on the first week back to work in 2021. I would like to start with, back in December, Casey Jones hosted a webinar where we kicked 2020 to the curb, and I would like to welcome all of you to 2021, which I hope is going to be off to a great start, and everybody's going to have a much more productive year. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into our main topic area. The Research and Innovation Task Force for IPMI has been working over the last year on a project we call the Roadmap to Recovery, which started in March of 2020, almost immediately after the pandemic began, and really was focused on documenting what our members were doing, how they were responding, the impacts they were seeing from initial lockdowns and the ongoing effects of the pandemic. Our most recent piece was published on Monday, and if you haven't gotten a chance to see it, we'll shoot you a link to where it is. But it focuses largely on academic campuses and how they adapted in fall of 2020, the types of strategies they used to help bring people back to campus, adapt to changing class types, adapt to changing commute patterns, and still try to keep their programs running in the face of a lot of change. And the outcomes of that also talk about what could happen in the spring semester, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Let's tee up some of the topic areas from the fall of 2020 and interesting data points that we saw, and let's discuss how we're adapting for spring of 2021. I know a lot of the folks on this call are in the university realm, and you are probably awaiting students to return to campus this week or next in whatever form or fashion that may be. And just kind of learning from one another about how we adapt policy and practice for parking, mobility, shuttling, whatever it may be. Before we jump into discussion, first, there's a lot of people on this call that I recognize that were part of the surveying efforts, and I just want to say thank you for taking part in that. Thank you for lending information to the document and to the effort we had. And there's a handful of you on here that have agreed to be picked on a little bit. So I'm probably gonna call your name out and ask you a few questions, and we'll see where it goes from there. But everybody is welcome to join in the conversation and tell us how things are going on your campus or places where you work in the campus environment, or use the chat, as Justin said, and tee up some topic areas, and we'll try to bring those up. Before we do that, I'm gonna share the document with you. Let's see where we are. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should be seeing the issue document that was uploaded the other day. And that is on IPMI's issue site, and there should be a link to it coming soon, and maybe Justin can put it in the chat for us. But just spend a couple of minutes going through the document, helping you understand what's in here and the usability of the data. We surveyed academic campuses in the fall of 2020 and asked them a number of questions about how their programs were responding to the pandemic and what changes were taking place in the first semester back after essentially everyone left in spring of 2020. What did fall of 2020 look like? And we got a pretty good response. A number of universities responded, academic campuses from across the country, and a variety of enrollment sizes. We also got some interesting information about how people were taking classes. So there was a very small minority of campuses where classes were occurring in person, large proportion where classes were occurring remote or in a hybrid fashion where there was some in person and some remote. But largely, even if folks were back on campus, they were in a remote fashion, which obviously changed the way we do business. We also asked people about their expectations for when demand would come back, and largely people are looking at later this year as we get into the full vaccination process and maybe a return by fall of 2021. Within the document, there are a number of pages that look like this that go into different types of strategies that campuses used. And the way we tried to organize this was what percentage of campuses were using it, what percentage of campuses intended to maintain those strategies in spring of 2021 or will not use them in spring of 2021. And for a few of these, we actually looked at what were the impacts to revenue. So were there revenue shortfalls associated with modifying permit structures or providing flexible permit options, and how different were those revenue shortfalls for those that did and did not use them. So we have a number of pages that go through things like that with payment platforms, payment options, things like enforcement and shuttling and mobility, and how people were using the different options on campus, educational programs, staffing, work from home, those types of things. So there's a good bit of information about strategies that campuses were using over the fall 2020 semester. And then it wraps up with what does spring 2021 look like, and what are you adapting new or changing in spring of 2021? And a few of the things we saw were, providing more flexible payment options, whether that's flexible permits or hourly visitor pay-as-you-go type parking, really focusing on data-driven decision-making, because it's not only adapting from semester to semester, but as the type of activity on campus changes, we're adapting week to week from our shuttling perspective or from our parking perspective. We asked people about what were some of the impacts to budgeting. And so for spring and fall of 2021, there were things like reprioritizing capital projects or maintenance and putting those off until they were absolutely needed, just to reserve revenue, or replenishing or using revenue reserves on campus. And about 68% of the respondents for fall of 2020 had used revenue reserves to cover operational costs. And so replenishing those or trying to maintain those balances. We asked people about revenue impacts. So what were the overall revenue shortfalls from the changes made due to COVID-19? And the largest areas where revenue was impacted were citations, hourly visitor parking, events, just because of lack of activity on campus. Permits also took a hit as enrollment may have changed, or people opted out of buying permits, or they bought a flexible option. So we go through some of that data by type, and we go through some of that data by location as well on these pages to just give you a sense of how things were impacted across the country. And then we wrap up with some conclusions and key takeaways, and a couple of those were really understanding the balance and the trade-off between some of the decisions we were making from a flexible, safe campus, customer-driven perspective, and the outcomes of the revenue loss or the staffing impacts from those, and documenting those impacts so that we understood how to mitigate them going forward, as well as communicate them to campus leadership, relative to how our programs are operating. And then really flexibility in payment options, flexibility in commute options are key. Communicating seemed to be the most important thing, communicating how things were changing on campus and being able to adapt using data-driven decision-making. So those are some of the key takeaways from the conversations we had. And then on the last page, we had a few of our survey respondents who were nice enough to let us do some video recorded calls. And you can click on those and there's a conversation around what flexible parking options or TDM or communications may look like, and how they were impacted on the various campuses for those that were part of that. So the document is now live and you can get it. And the Research and Innovation Task Force is certainly eager to answer any questions you may have about it if you've got those afterwards. But we're going to jump into the discussion part of it and just go through some of the things we've learned. I would ask Kathleen, we've got a couple survey questions, if you wouldn't mind making those live and having the group respond, and then we'll launch into that discussion. So the first survey question asks, how do you expect your campus to operate in spring of 2021? In-person classes, remote classes, or a hybrid class structure? And then the second question asks about the types of payment options, traditional, flexible, pay-as-you-go, and you can select all that apply there. What are you trying to implement on your campus going forward? And it looks like we're slowing down here. So if we could, Kathleen, publish the results of that survey. So it looks like the majority of folks are going to continue in spring 2021 with hybrid class structures where we've got people on campus. We may not have them going to class physically every day, more remote just to keep people socially distanced. And then it looks like we've got folks really continuing with traditional semester permanents. And I see in the comments that we weren't able to select all that apply for everybody. So I think it's going to be a robust kind of combination of things. So that's the survey results. So I'm gonna jump in to the first question that we have, and then there's been a couple of questions in the chat we'll circle back to as we get into it. But my first question that I have is, have you adapted flexible operational permit payment options on campus to provide better customer experience, better campus safety, and what does that look like going forward? And I'm gonna pick on a couple people first to get the conversation going, but please feel free to jump in after they get done. So I'm going to start with Perry Eggleston from UC Davis. So if Perry's on the call, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about where UC Davis is moving in spring of 2021 and some of the things that you're trying to accomplish, both long-term as well as during the ongoing pandemic.
Well, thank you. We just Monday transitioned our students to a daily rate system. We've discontinued monthly and annual permits for them, and they'll pay on a daily rate. And we have our plan for our employees begin July 1st. And again, the intent is to discontinue the use of monthly and annual permits and go to a totally daily rate basis.
So, and this was a program, Perry, that you were intending to start, prior to the pandemic. It was part of, kind of a TDM strategy. Do you find that given the flexibility of the way people are using your campus, that this is easier to implement now and kind of helping you push towards, the future of campus, or is this a hurdle, making the hurdle a little bit bigger with the types of activity you're having on campus?
Actually, we were planning to do this so that we were going to this system later than sooner, but COVID gave us the opportunity to make the transition now. We're able to do the technology upgrades needed, added LPR, and because of the COVID and the fact that there's less people on campus and people aren't coming to campus as often, they're finding that they really do like this idea of being a pay as you go. pay when you're here, not have to be charged a flat rate, and then go forward. What's going to be interesting is when we get into the fall, if that is normal, how our demand structures are going to go. Because we do offer a lower daily rate to our affiliates. It's basically, if you park every day on campus that we charge, you pay about the same rate as the monthly rate. And that was just, I needed to do that to get this system program going so that we get past the union grievances and things like that. But it's going to be, it's an interesting experiment on if it really does affect utilization and affect demand. And my hope is that folks with the choice will be able to choose alternative transportation making the single occupancy vehicle their last choice instead of their first choice.
Thanks, Perry. And there's a couple of questions in the chat that that are specific to you. So Meredith Williams asks, how do parkers redeem their parking each day? What is the technology you're using to help folks?
We're using Pay by Cell Park Mobile. What we do is we have our system T2 Flex. We have our affiliate rates. So those are folks who've traditionally have had access to our monthly and annual permits. Right now it's just students and faculty and staff that are opting in. And we send a email list of SFTP file over to Park Mobile. And so you register with your UC Davis account. And when you do that and enter the zone, it offers you the appropriate affiliate rate. And so that's how we're doing it on a daily basis.
Two other questions that came up in the chat, Perry. Wanted to know how you determined your fee structure that supports and you considered a value. And then the second one, is there a guarantee for a parker to get into a specific location on campus? And if not, is that an issue?
First question, we did it, again, initially we did it, in California, we're a heavily unionized state. So to get through the grievances and to get this program rolling, if you were to park every day in a month, we took there's 245 parking days a year at UC Davis, taking out holidays and weekends. Out of those 245, I multiplied the monthly rate by 12, divided, and came up to about $3.18. We rounded down, and so it came up to $3 for our general use rate. And so that's how we determine the rate there. We're limited on how much we can increase per CBAs. So again, we're looking at how that's going to affect. But again, our analysis at the beginning, when we were looking at utilization rates versus compliance versus payment, that our actual revenue will be slightly higher when things are normal, due to the belief that one, compliance rates are increased because of LPR, and two, that more people will be willing to pay because the rates aren't so high, and they're only paying for the days they park. And if they don't come to campus, they ride a bike, they don't pay. We're also, the campus is putting together a telework committee, and my goal is to, and I'm co-chairing that, and my goal is to make that as a TDM mode, so that, again, we encourage faculty and staff that have the ability to telecommute to continue using that as a tool to reduce our demand on campus. Getting into a specific, no, there is no guarantee. Every day, you basically, you park, you peruse for your zone, you pay, and you enjoy your day. There is no guarantee. We have an app that we're developing, or we're working with a company so that we do broadcast or tell folks through the app where there's available space, but there is no guarantee of parking. There's no reserving. It's, you park in an open space and you pay at that time. Surface lots, no, it's our garages and surface lots, all our facilities.
Thanks, Perry. I appreciate that. And yeah, I think, Jennifer Tugas made a point about in the blog the other day, there's been kind of an acceleration of already trends that were already in place before COVID hit. And I think, the move to a daily decision platform on campuses is one that we were seeing slowly but steadily happen, but it's being accelerated by the need for flexible payment options and the dynamicness of when people are going to be on campus. I wanted to pick on somebody else real quick. So Peter Lang from Texas A&M. I'd love to hear what Texas A&M is doing from a permitting perspective, and whether you have flexible permits and what it looks like coming up for spring 2021.
Thanks, Brett, and hello, everybody. I'm just looking around the crowd and the amount of experience that's on here, and then start aging myself. When I started doing this, Mike Harris had only worked at one SEC school. Now he's worked at a quarter of them. So it's time is starting to add up. Interesting on the permit side of things. The permits have actually been our saving grace here at A&M. All the other revenue has evaporated. Anything hourly parking, transient visitor, event, obviously football, basketball, anything else is gone. And so the only revenue that stayed, and it's hung in there at almost 90%, has been our annual permit revenue. We've been very generous with refunds. Anybody that wants one can have one. And the folks that are opting out, we've got great, visitor options, hourly options, and, online, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever they want to do in a number of areas. So try to provide that flexibility, but one thing that we haven't done is relented off of our priority system when it comes to returning a permit, and it's been a bit of a sticking point on the faculty staff side that have wanted to return a permit, and we're happy to return it. It's just we can't guarantee to get them back where they are, and it really is just some of the really highly desirable lots that we could instantly move somebody into. Even if they weren't there on campus, they would see the value. So we've had some discussions around those things and trying to work through that kind of stuff. But very early on in this whole thing, we started promoting and talking about existing options, using daily, monthly, weekly options, and the transient options that we have all over campus. And that's going to be the story for spring. We don't see much of a difference on campus for spring. Anecdotally, we're seeing maybe a few more in-person classes being offered, mainly in that hybrid fashion, not mandatory in-person, but more sessions that do have the hybrid option. And we are hoping to see more students on campus than we did in the fall. And we're really, in summer will be the same, we think, and we're really banking on fall getting much closer to normal. Maybe not quite 100%, but much closer to that. I had a good conversation a month or two ago with Melinda, and she was a little bit more pessimistic about what fall would look like, and was thinking closer to half, and we were thinking closer to 90. So it's probably someplace in there, but we really need it to be way closer to normal.
So follow-up question, providing the flexible options, the daily, monthly, semester-based permits for folks, do you envision that spring of 2021, fall of 2021, as you're marching back to normality, when that happens, that more people are going to take advantage of the flexible options than they have in the past because they're learning and adapting to them?
I think so. We what a year to open a brand new garage, but we opened one in August, and having to pay for it in a very one of our highest demand sections of campus. And so we brought several hundred more transient spaces to this corner of campus, and I really kind of did a better job of spreading out our transient or hourly parking better across campus. And I do think that we'll see folks migrating to that as Perry has shifted his whole system. I think we've always kind of relied on options here rather than kind of pushing folks to change the system. But I do think we'll see people continue to opt out. We have over the last 5 years, and I think there's potential to help accelerate it a little bit more. Well, they'll opt for a higher priced, more convenient transient option that lets them feel more like they've got an a la carte uh, and a more controlled parking option.
Yeah, again, to go back to some of the trends that were happening pre-COVID, in a lot of the places that we've worked, we've seen that where you provide the a la carte options and your patrons on campus basically choose permits and the a la carte options, so they've got the flexibility on a day-to-day basis, which is good for them and good for the bottom line as well. And we've seen that consistently across several campuses. So if that's one thing that we come out of this with is pushing more of those options rather than making the decision for people that they're going to have a semester permit at the beginning of the year, we might be able to adapt people's behavior. So thanks, Peter. I appreciate that. Couple more people I was going to pick on. Brian Shaw from Stanford, not necessarily a flexible permit option, but I wonder if you could talk a little about what you did on campus from an enforcement perspective and kind of how that adapted over the fall semester.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. We had to go to a 24/7 enforcement approach at Stanford because of state and county regulations that all COVID related that needed to limit non-Stanford personnel coming to the university. And we'd never had that before. We always had free parking after about 4 o'clock during the week and all weekend. And so this had huge implications on the residents on the campus, as well as the activities and the contractors that came to campus. So we rolled that out. A lot of drama, a lot of challenges. We had to make some exceptions to commuting graduate students so that they didn't have to pay. It's been difficult to impose this, but it's been necessary. I hope that we'll be able to keep it once COVID is over because we need the money. And I think from a safety standpoint, it's actually in Stanford's best interest to not be this open place. We've seen increases in car thefts and in burglaries during COVID because of the lack of people around that normally helps preclude that from happening. And there is money we've been leaving on the table from events for years, performing facilities, athletics, different events that go on that have had the ability to park for free after hours and on weekends. And we end up, picking up the negative cost aspects of that, from cleanup and maintenance and all. So I hope that we're able to keep that around, thanks to the fact that we've gone to LPR and virtual permits and pay mobile payment technology. It was very simple to implement. Now, there wasn't a lot we had to do. It was more just education and informing. The biggest problem we had was the signs. We had to change about 5,000 signs on campus to reflect 24/7 enforcement. That's California Vehicle Code requires us to have that. That took us 2 weeks to get those signs changed. So that was a pretty big undertaking. But, I think for us, because we had done a lot of the things that Perry talked about, we had already done, we were in a position to take our parking management to this 24/7 level relatively easily, because I didn't have to issue a new permit and get it to people to park after hours. I just had to do it online and tell them about it, and then they could go get it through their existing eligibility that the system allows them to have by signing into it. So, to me, I just wrote an article about this that I hope some people saw. This is the time to start fixing what's broken. This is the time to take it to the next level. If not now, when? You've got folks that either need to have changes be made quickly or are needing to save money or needing to accommodate things in ways you never accommodated them before. And so this is the time to make innovations like Perry talked about and that Peter's talked about. Peter opened one new garage. Peter, I've opened 2 with a third coming online in a month. They're going to be bowling alleys. So I feel your pain big time. But what we're trying to do is to use COVID as a wedge to make long needed changes to our system that COVID has created the ability to see the faults in, right? I've alluded to it being like a low tide, and the tide's gone out. All the icky stuff is now for everyone to see, and it's now got to get cleaned up. That's what we need to be doing as parking professionals. Get with the program, get into the 21st century, make the needed changes, do the things that you've wanted to do and that need to be done so you can save money and then position your organization better both during and coming out of this pandemic. And it's going to be a while, folks. If you haven't done the math on the vaccinations, here's the math. We've done 4.5 vaccinations in 3.5 weeks. There are 330 million people in the United States. That's 5 years to vaccinate everybody. So if this doesn't start ratcheting itself up very soon, we're in this for a while. So this isn't going to be the summer, I'm afraid. It's going to be beyond, unless there's some dramatic change to how we're vaccinating ourselves. This has been a fairly slow process.
Thanks, Brian. And my resolution for 2021 was more optimism, and you've ended my resolution on day one, so thanks.
Hey, flip the math, Brett. Just do the math. Just do the math.
I'm trying not to.
And act accordingly.
Yeah. There's a couple questions for you. One is, how much did your personnel cost increase when you went to 24/7 enforcement?
It cost a little bit, but we essentially leveraged existing people and factor that into their patrolling. So, you know, we kind of spread it out and we moved some daytime folks to evenings because we didn't need as much daytime coverage during COVID because so much of the campus is not operating with people around. So we sort of just shifted the resources around. So it didn't really cost us much to do because we sort of sacrificed some of the daytime and moved it to the nighttime. Because there's areas of campus, there's nobody there. So we're not patrolling anything.
One last question for you, and this one's just in the chat. Would you mind posting a link to your article in the chat so everybody can find it?
Yeah, I can do that. Just give me a few minutes to do that, but I'm happy to do that. No problem.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to pick on one more person and then we'll open it up. And I did not give her a heads up that I was going to pick on her. So Melinda from ASU, Peter name dropped you. So I thought it would be appropriate to bring you into the conversation. Can you tell what's going on at ASU and your various campuses around the Valley in fall of 2020 and how you're getting ready for spring of 2021?
Sure thing. Thanks, and hi. Happy to see everybody on this call. It's been a while seeing your sparkling faces, so Happy New Year. Goodness, at ASU, yes, a lot of things going on there. As Peter mentioned, our more pessimistic view, and JC Porter is also on this call. You can see him. He is my partner in crime in all of this. Of course, we have had our heads together on a lot of this, especially with respect to permits and how and what we're seeing on campus. Similar to Peter and others, we've had a dismal fall. Our permits have been the savings grace. Similarly, in terms of revenue, we're down somewhere around 40% overall. Transient revenue and the like, all down about 75%. So those have been two big hits. And that has led us into what can we possibly be thinking for next fall, given what we see. At ASU, we are committed to still offering this, what we call ASU Sync and ASU Online and hybrid. And even though the immersion classes being in person have been offered, most students have opted to stay in their pajamas and Zoom from dorms or at home. That's not likely to change here this spring. We're anticipating a few more students being on campus. I think moving out of parents' house and coming to campus to the tune of about 600 students. But beyond that, we don't think that's much of an uptick in activity overall on campus. With regard to next fall, we do still have some pessimism, and that's even before the vaccine got out. But to Brian's point, we don't think that that's going to be a significant impact because of, again, all of the talk out there of people who might take it, won't take it, is it mandated? There's all of that discussion that's starting to ensue, even from our campus committees that are starting to work on this. So all in all, we think still there's going to be the natural attrition from teleworking, from students still opting the uncertainty of even international students not being able to maybe travel and still get here. So with those things, the natural attrition is creating some concern. We do think there will be an uptick, but certainly not to anything what we saw before COVID hit. We are estimating and budgeting somewhere around 50%, 50 to 65%, let's say, activity on campus, which only bumps us up about a 20, 25% from what we've been seeing now. And that is being conservative and again, somewhat pessimistic, but given our budget, our reserves, and all of the obligations, we too opened a brand new facility here in July that is $52 million parking structure, if you can get your head around that. Luckily, we've been able to do some internal things. That was internally financed, so we were given a stay, at least for this year, to not have to start paying debt service there. Taken away certain capital program projects that have been delayed and are being discussed. So all in all, our mitigation strategies have helped us stay afloat for this year. Looking into next year, we have to hit the budget margins, at least, that we are projecting. And we should be okay as long as we do start to see some kind of an uptick happen next fall, and that's what we're hoping for. So JC, feel free to chime in here and add anything. Monthly permits, those types of things we're looking at. Again, our discussion on rates, we were scheduled to have a significant market rate adjustment to our parking rates this fiscal year 22, this next fall. That has, we've been rethinking that, and obviously we don't intend to. We hope our leadership, after presenting to them just before the break, takes heed that even though we need money, that significant type of rate increase would be more detrimental. A natural occurrence with TDM has happened with the pandemic, so we don't think that taking out the stick in this case is going to really do us any good. It could actually have a more negative effect with people wanting to return or coming back to campus. So that's just some of our thinking. We do hope to implement some monthly type of passes, but they won't necessarily be cheaper. We think our parking permit is the discounted way of parking on campus. So if you're a daily rate, we think about it in some regard as an apartment lease. If you pay a year, you have a lower rate. If you go month to month, you're going to pay a slightly higher rate. So that's been some of our thinking and reasoning with respect to our pending implementation of monthly type of offerings around our campuses.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Melinda's right. We were heading down the TDM path. We were all ready to go, and then COVID hit, and COVID has been our TDM plan. And now we're actually thinking reverse TDM of, crap, how do we get people to park again? We need to sell more permits and get people to park more. So it pains me to say that, but yeah, I'm almost anti-TDM at this point. Just want to get as many cars back as possible at this point.
It's too much TDM.
Yes.
And you may have heard JC and I say this on other calls, but we worked on a TDM plan together on campus, and our number one recommendation was people should work from home, and we're met with, oh, that'll never happen. And we made that recommendation in February of 2020. And then the grand experiment happened in March of 2020. So it's too much TDM, but we'll see it course correct. We're going to jump into a question about shuttling in just a second, and I'm probably going to pick on you again, JC, to just talk about some of the ASU shuttling stuff. But does anybody have anything they'd like to add about what's happening on their campus from a flexible permit perspective or flexible payment option perspective? All right, hearing none, feel free to jump into the chat if you want to add anything, and we can come back to it. So JC, we'll stick with you. One of the things we looked at in the survey was how has shuttling adapted on campus? And I find it interesting at ASU, you don't just shuttle on campus. You have 4 campuses throughout the Phoenix metro area that heavily rely on shuttles. And how has that been impacted, and how are you adjusting that for spring of 2021?
Yeah, so that's been really interesting. So I know a lot of universities actually have their own shuttle in-house. We actually have a third-party company that we work with, and we've actually had to do a lot of strategic planning because our shuttle buses are running. We're down 87% in our ridership, and that's running in between 4 campuses. Our shuttles are still running 17 hours a day, about 600 miles a day. So they're still running really a lot of miles with less people. And it was actually a good thing because with the COVID, we had to kind of reduce the seating in the buses. And in the fall, that's what we were really worried about is, are we going to have enough seats in the buses, or are we going to have to add more buses? Because we went from a 56 passenger buses down to those 56 passengers. Now we got down to like 25. So we were really worried that we weren't going to have enough buses. But it turned out we did have enough buses. And now we're seeing the ridership so low that we've actually had to kind of work with our third party partner to be able to kind of reduce some of that cost. And I think we've actually, Melinda and I have done some really interesting partnership ideas of, well, their biggest cost was they leased the buses. So let's make sure we cover the leases, but let's not keep them on the road, the wear and tear, and lower the cost to us. And so we did a couple of those, and then we're also reducing some routes and some other on-time performance measures that we have. We had to have insert buses and other buses because traffic is so bad throughout the valley. But now the traffic isn't very bad, so we can actually reduce those inject buses that we have. But the interesting part is we still have a group of people that rely on these shuttle buses. So it's not something that we can necessarily just take away and wait till COVID and bring it back. There are students, faculty, and staff that still rely heavily on these buses as their main mode of transportation to get in and around the valley. So it's something that we really can't take away at all, but it's something that we're still working with our partners to ensure that we get the best bang for our buck. And again, just cross our fingers and hope the utilization returns. Melinda and I actually have a bet. She's betting fall of 2021 that things are going to return back to 80%. I'm saying fall of 2022. So before we get back to around 80%. So we've got some oysters riding on that bet. So we'll see what happens. But I'm being pessimistic, where normally I'm optimistic, but I don't think we're going to get our parkers or our bus ridership back until probably the fall of 2022. Back to about 80% is kind of what I'm guesstimating.
You're joining Brian Shaw and crushing my optimism resolution.
Yes.
So thanks, JC. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I'd like to pick on Josh Canner from George Mason. Can you tell us a little about what's happened in your world with shuttling, and what are you looking at going forward?
Yeah, we're in a similar position, I think, to ASU and what JC described. You know, we had concerns about we cut the seating on the buses to 50% capacity by installing shields between each of the seats. Otherwise, we were looking at being 25% seating capacity. But ridership was so incredibly low that like 6 weeks into the semester, we had already cut half our service before the semester began, cut the existing service in half like 6 weeks in. And when we start the spring semester in a few weeks, we're cutting it in half again. You know, it's just one of those, we couldn't justify running the service, you know, when you're averaging like 2 people per hour, you know, even, you know, and so we had actually increased the size of our buses. We actually started using coach buses to, you know, hopefully have more seats to make up for the seating loss. And it really didn't matter. But then again, we were kind of committed to the cost of those buses. So it definitely cost us a lot of money in trying to meet those demands that never really came through. You know, so again, I think the big question, you know, for a lot of people is after the spring, and Peter mentioned that, is like, what do people really think it's going to be by next fall? And, you know, again, I'm anticipating that with our shuttles that, you know, if we come back to 50 or 70% of in-person, that we're going to have to basically bring back most of our routes. But I don't see us being able to afford to keep the existing service that we had with the revenue losses. So I see running most of the routes we had, but at a much reduced level. So it's almost like stepping back in time, you know, 5 or 10 years for a lot of our routes where we kind of incrementally have added service over the years. So, you know, again, I'm taking the approach of, you know, I want to see the demand before I'm really willing to throw out the service. We got burned so bad this last fall. I just can't afford to take that chance again. But it's, you know, again, I think I mentioned that in the chat though, you know, and again, like we're all kind of waiting for the academic side to really determine what our futures are. I mean, we can only do so much, but it's really up to the decision makers. And I think the administrations tend to have a more optimistic view of that things will come back to normal. And I think us at the ground level tend to have a little bit more pessimistic view that things will come back to normal. So, we'll wait and see. So it'll be interesting to have this conversation in about 5 months from now.
Perhaps we can do it again at the end of the spring semester to see how things have evolved. You and I've talked, and there's discussion about doing on-demand transit. Do you see that as a viable substitute for,
Yeah, we're hoping. I mean, the one of the positives of being so slow is that we're actually able to try some pilots that we really probably wouldn't want to when we're super busy. So we're actually implementing an on-demand service that we're hoping will serve some of the locations on the routes that we cut. So we kept 2 of our 8 routes that we'll be running, but and like what JC said, there's a handful of people on all these other routes that don't have options and they need to get to campus. And so we're kind of hoping this on-demand service may serve some of these locations within our area. So again, we struggle because again, we have 3 campuses that were connected within a 30-mile stretch, but it's an hour to an hour and a half in each direction to go 15 miles. So, it's difficult to run on demand when you're talking that far, but we have some closer destinations that we're hoping to serve. And yeah, certainly interested to see if it will pick up some of the slack, because if it does, that may allow us to perhaps maybe cut back some of the other routes when we return back closer to normal and rely a little bit more on demand.
Thanks, Josh. I have a third question, and I'm going to adapt it a little bit because, as per usual, I think Casey asked it better at the beginning of the webinar. But we've talked a little bit about returning to normal, and we've talked about what when that's going to happen. But what we really haven't talked about is what it looks like and how we're learning lessons from what's happening right now. I know Brian and Peter and Melinda and JC and Josh have all talked about let's think about what types of change we can implement, whether it's daily parking like Perry or 24/7 enforcement like Brian. But I would love to hear from the group and those that have spoke and those that haven't yet. What lessons are you learning from the last 10 months, and how are you using that to adapt your programs for fall 2021 or fall 2022 as we come into what is definitely going to be a different campus environment?
Oh, Brett, one of the things that I'll add, I was just in the chat, is that finding more sustainable funding models for some of the programs that we have. Relying on parking for absolutely to fund everything, which is what we've done at ASU. This has proven not to be a good model. We are seeking for some type of central funds, and maybe eventually, we don't think it'll be this year, maybe a year or 2 down the road, finally getting a student transportation fee that levels out accountability and the cost of parking and transportation more on a level basis across the community, where there's a little bit coming from everybody to make the system work. So that's one of the big lessons learned, and I think our administration, our leadership is taking heed of that. It is right now kind of, well, let's see how things come back and kind of go back to the same model. We don't think that'll be the case, which is hopeful for us. But that's kind of something on the budget side. It's been an eye-opening shock to see the dip in revenue and the reliance on that revenue, not just for parking and transit, but for other university initiatives, revertments that we give back to the university, as most auxiliaries do.
Thanks, Melinda. Anybody else out there want to talk about some of the things they think will be core structural changes going forward?
One of the things I kind of see happening, as we go forward, and the first survey questions about what our class schedules are going to be like. I mean, and in talking to some of my counterparts and like fellow auxiliaries like dining and housing, and we're all kind of connected at the hip and dealing with the same kind of issues, is this idea that the student who comes to class all the time in person may not really may not be there in the future. I mean, obviously a lot of schools were expanding their online offerings, but this idea that the hybrid solution, especially in places where traffic is so terrible, again, it's and you're in major cities, it's a major, no matter what services we provide and all the shuttles we have and all that, it's a major hassle to get to and from work and to and from school. And that if, for a lot of folks, if they can find ways to reduce the amount of trips they have to take, I see that as a way for a lot of the universities to expand their enrollment. It's funny, I was asked in a budget meeting yesterday, what's our 5-year plan to recoup and expand revenue? And I'm thinking, we don't even know what our class schedule is going to be like in 2 weeks. And you want us to like forecast what no one else knows. But that's the idea. I think from a university perspective, the only way they're going to recoup revenues is to increase the number of people, but not by having them in person. So yeah, which makes those variable parking options like that Perry talked about, even more attractive, because you have an audience that's not taking classes 2 or 3 days a week, but it may be 1 day a week, 1 week, 2 days the next week. Maybe they don't meet they meet online for a few weeks. So having those options for people that aren't here all the time, I think are going to become important.
It also is going to impact, the other side of it, how we move them around, where we built shuttle systems and transit systems on our campuses now that are based on the expectation there's going to be a large group of people moving every 55 minutes or every hour and a half. And if we're no longer having people in class, every day of the week, we can begin to save some money on those sides of things and maybe make it point to point or on demand type services. So I agree with you. Answering the question, what's going to happen 2 years from now on an academic campus, is really tough, because we don't know how many people will be working from home, will be doing hybrid classes, how that begins to change things. But to everybody's point, from the beginning, Brian made the point, now is the time to implement change. As you think about Perry's model and TDM models that ASU's implemented and other campuses around the country, those tend to be more flexible and adaptable to allow people to have those hybrid setups and work from home setups without the traditional, we have to build a parking garage because 4,000 people are going to show up at 8 o'clock in the morning every Tuesday and Thursday. How about others? What are some other lessons that you're taking away from this?
So I'm going to jump in. This is Ross Allenton, University of Minnesota. It's interesting listening, because I've had a sense here of almost the exact opposite, that students, as I read Reddit posts, etc., are wanting to get back in class, in person, interacting with each other. And remote learning and hybrid learning are, I think, going to be a part of the future, but they're not where people want to be. They want to be together. And so, I'm on Melinda's side. I think, I'm hoping for 80% this coming fall 21. And with that said, I think that it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Our campus is highly dependent on the regional transit, bringing a lot of students to campus. But the one thing we've seen is nobody wants to ride in close proximity on transit. And so, that was a piece that we had to deal with in the short term, was all the folks who had transit passes who now wanted parking passes. And, that's a relatively good thing, with the exception that our leadership at the university decided that university employees would not have to pay for parking. Whether you were on campus or working remote, it would be voluntary. You could choose to pay or not pay. So that's been a challenge. But I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, is trying to predict demand in the fall for parking. And then we have a gated system for the most part. Probably 80% of our stalls are behind gates. And that's all because people want to know where they're going to go park in the morning. They don't like the hunting permit concept. And so that's our big challenge, is how can we devise a system that will guarantee parking access to the place that they want to park, but let them pay per, day, per use, if you will. And the good news is, if everyone wants to hear the silver lining, February 14th, our Board of Regents approved a $6 million change out of our parking equipment. So if you need to change out 37 gated facilities and 100 and some odd lanes, a pandemic is a really great time to do it, because you don't have customers in your way, and your staff have lots of time to focus on everything that needs to be done to change out that equipment. So that's been a little bit of a silver lining for us.
That's a good point. And I've heard quite a few campuses that have focused on maintenance and cleaning and kind of just getting the facilities back up to speed while you don't have that demand on campus. And thank you, Ross, because you have restored my optimism for 2021, where others have waned it a little bit. We've got time for one more response. Anybody wants to talk about what they've learned from their campus? Feel free to.
Right, you got a question from Casey, I think. Casey
Okay.
Hi. Well, no, I just want to say, I have two things to say. One is I have a daughter going to university next year, and all her friends, and I know, like, just from now being involved with this age group, that they all want to be back in school. Like, she's yearning, like she's pining, and she's living for next year, right? Because she really believes. And as a parent, I don't know where she's going to go yet. She hasn't decided, but I can say that I'm not sure public transit would be my first option. I may want her to have a car and be able to drive. And so I think there's probably a lot of that mentality happening. So if that gives you any hope, I want to bring the positive energy. But the other thing I want to say is, and I hate to do this because this is such an intimate conversation about what you guys are going through. So I'm not bringing a salesy perspective to it, but from we're a technology company for contactless payment. And there is a lot of product out there that can help you guys out with this stuff. So it's such a hard time for us to get the word out about stuff, but like, there are a ton of products out there that even we're developing, other companies are developing to make this easier for you so that you have options. So, like, again, we're not at conferences and we can't speak to one another and really get the word out there, but there is a ton of stuff. So just research it and figure it out. And, we're trying our best as a technology company to figure out different ways in which to help you guys make this easier for your lives, because we sort of see, obviously, we want more people parking and we want to make it easier for people because that's better for us as well. So there are options, is what I want to say on another positive note.
Thanks, Casey. I appreciate that. And I think we're hearing a lot of adaptation and a lot of programs that are growing. And so I think there's a lot of positivity, even surrounded by unknown of when things get back to normal. The folks that have chimed in through the chat and through discussion on this call are certainly making the most of the situation and adapting and continuing to grow their campus, even in the face of revenue struggles and not uncertainty with what's going to happen on campus. So I would like to, we're about done. I'd like to give you just a couple of closing thoughts on the Roadmap to Recovery project and where we're going. And then I'll turn it back over to Justin. So again, appreciate everybody that joined the call today, and doubly appreciate anybody that's on this call that took part in helping us assemble data for this project and for previous projects. From the Research and Innovation Task Force side of things, as long as you're still dealing with impacts, we're going to continue to document how those impacts are changing things on campus or in your community, if you're in a municipality as well, and helping to try to understand and organize solutions so that you and your colleagues and your peers and other institutions have a resource to be able to take those back to your leadership. So thank you to everybody that contributed to this. If you have any questions about the document, you can reach out to us on the Research and Innovation Task Force, myself or Rachel Yoka, who's somewhere on this call, and look forward to continue working with everybody else. And I do like the idea of getting back together after the end of this semester so we can circle back on all the optimism and all the good work that's gonna happen here. Justin?
Thanks, Brett. I want to say thank you to Brett for moderating today's Shop Talk. I would like to invite everyone to continue the conversation by visiting IPMI's forum at forum.parking-mobility.org. Also want to remind everybody of our upcoming IPMI Virtual Mobility Summit. Get ready for a great new 2-day event, the IPMI Mobility and Innovation Summit. Collaborate with the brightest minds in mobility, transportation, and parking. Connect with innovators, startups, and industry veterans as we tackle the toughest challenges and prepare you and your organization to rethink the way we get from place to place and stay ahead of the demands and the trends. Early bird rates and team discount rates end on January 15th of 2021. We hope to see you there. In addition, want to remind everybody to stay connected. We have additional resources that are come through for the rest of the year. So please visit our Stay Connected page so that way you can see what resources are available for you. Again, I want to thank you for being with us today. Thank you for joining us. And this Shop Talk is copyrighted in 2021 by the International Parking and Mobility Institute with all rights reserved. You may now disconnect. Thank you.